Okay, we are live, so I'm going to call the committee to order. This is January 12th, and this is Finance Committee. Committee, today this is finding out, what we've done since we left. We've got Steve Klein and Stephanie maybe. Stephanie is just Steve today.
I think it's just me today. Stephanie will be batting cleanup. She's out of town with family stuff. She has to do.
Yeah, I'd heard that. So we have Steve full time. What I'm trying to set up is after Steve. Late last week, the Commissioner Tierney called and said there were a couple of broadband contracts that had been put out, but that they were CRF funds, and because CRF ended December 31st, the contract ceased to be paid at that point. She thought she had the authority to continue paying them until they were done because CRF funds have been extended. There's also some UI funds that are in a similar position. I emailed and said, given the history of this committee with the commissioner, I would feel better if we concurred in that decision. Since then, Maria Royal, and in consultation with, I guess, everybody else, has concurred in that we need to authorize it in some way. So Faith is busily trying to reach the commissioner and Maria, and we'll see what those are, what the projects are, what the consequences of not extending them are, what the money is still there. It was not reclaimed by the administration during the last weeks of joint fiscal and the CRF money. The administration almost daily was pulling money that hadn't been expended back in and expending it. The legislature really was trying to reserve some of it to help with this year's budget issues. So, but my understanding is the money is there. It wasn't recouped, but we'll try and get an update because today is our lightest load day. Ed funding tends to be a little heavier, and we've got more of that coming in. We do have the commissioners scheduled the Friday, but I'm not sure this can wait till Friday. So that's what we're trying to do today. No, Senator Brock, you do have your hand up, but that hand was wherever my cursor shows up. I get a white hand instead of a yellow hand, and they used to be blue hands. So what happened to blue hands?
Depends on the mood that you're in when you raise your hand.
Senator Brock, the floor is yours.
Just an observation on this additional money for projects in progress. I started to go through this enormous list of projects, and I beginning to see what almost looks like an unfortunate pattern of companies back in November saying we're not going to be able to do what we said we were going to do in time, principally because we have a shortage of staff. And then as a result, the projects aren't getting done. And I just wonder, I think it's something we should poke at when we speak with the commissioner next, because as I said, I'm beginning to see a concerning pattern there.
Yeah, and I think I CC'd you all. Steve Whitaker also wanted to come in and talk about the emergency plan that we're going to hear about on Friday that Matt Dunn's company has done. I told him we would be, this is just a presentation on Friday. we're going to be going into more detail as to what we learned from that and from other ones. And I told him I thought he would be more helpful, his comments to us when we did that. So he will be coming in. I know he has a lot to say about our whole planning process.
Well,
So
the essence of what he's saying, and again, if you start going through the detail, is there a number of things that the vendor, Matt Dunn, and the companies associated with promised to do, but then when you look at what they actually did, there appears to be a deviation in a number of areas where what they did wasn't exactly what they said they were going to do. So again, that's arguable.
And this week I would like to just get the presentation in and then have the argument at another time. I am sure we will have the argument.
Senator
So-
Cummings, this is Faith.
Yes,
June Tierney can only join us for 15 minutes from 3 to 3:15. So I suggested to her that maybe we have her now, she can join us. And if Steve can stay with us, we could back off the Steve.
can you do that? How's your schedule?
I have a meeting at 3, so I can do it as long as I get out of here by 3.
So the commissioner,
So if you want to go ahead, that's fine. I don't think I need it more than an hour, so that would
yeah,
give
I
you.
wouldn't
Yeah.
think so. We didn't do that much. All right, let's see if we can get the commissioner. Have we heard from Maria?
No, I haven't heard from Maria.
Okay. I think we
I
can have the
will-
commissioner come in and talk to us.
So I'm sending her the note right now.
And I think Maria is just drafting some language that probably says it's okay if we decide it's okay.
And in the meantime, Senator, would you like to do the election of the clerk?
Yes. Okay, yes, we need to elect a clerk. And I frequently forget this because Senator McDonald has served as clerk and vice chair since I can remember on this committee. So I think the first question is, Senator McDonald, are you willing to continue?
Eager to serve, Madam Chair.
Okay, is anybody else interested in being the clerk? Okay, it's a highly sought after position. Would someone like to make a motion?
I move we cast one vote for the Honorable Senator Mark McDonald for clerk.
Absolutely.
Okay, further discussion. If not, all those say aye.
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 Okay, opposed. Congratulations, Senator McDonald.
Thank
You
you.
won't have to send back all those voting sheets. All right, we're trying to get Commissioner Tierney on the line. We're usually a little more organized than this, but this thing came up, I think like last Friday, Thursday or Friday. And I think the legal opinion came in over the weekend.
This is like improv theater, you get your lines handed to you as you walk on the stage some days. Right?
Yes. While we're waiting, I see it. I see it. Okay, June Tierney
here.
is waiting. Yeah, there she is. Welcome, Commissioner. I know you and I told the committee last Friday when we met, had talked about some of the contracts that you had out that you wanted to keep funding after. Once the CRF money was expanded, we've gotten the legal opinion that we need to authorize that. So I think, since we seem to be under quite a time crunch on this one, that if you can tell us and then perhaps back us up with something written about how many of these contracts there are, what their status is, what happens if they don't continue, what was the plan under, when they were ending on December 31st. So the floor is yours.
I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, is that directed to me?
Yes.
I'm just walking in, I apologize. Those are all very good questions, and I don't think I have that level of detail at my fingertips. I can say that the note that I sent around this weekend, I believe to you and to Senator Kitchell and Representative Hooper and I forget who else at this point, was what I was articulating in that was the proposition that I was actually reading the statute in a manner such that I thought we could proceed. So that has been the proposal the course of action I was going to take. But I did recognize there was an ambiguity, and that's why I was checking in with the legislature about that. The kinds of contracts that we're talking about are the connectivity initiative contracts, where broadband construction is underway. Some of those contracts have experienced supply chain disruptions and the like, and therefore the work on them continues, notwithstanding that we've passed December 31. And my understanding under the Treasury guidelines and the advice given to the administration by the Guidehouse consultants is that we were within the bounds of permissible conduct there. So I brought the issue to you folks because I also understood that there are some other sunset provisions in Act 137 that possibly need to be addressed as well. And evidently the opinion back from Ledge Council is that indeed that is the preferred course of action. And as I understand it, as we speak, there is a measure that's working its way through the House Energy Technology Committee on that and should be coming to you, I would think, in short order.
Ah, okay. So that does away with some of our technical issues.
Yes.
Can you get us a list of the projects and their status, when they started, when they finished, or all right, what happens if they don't go forward? What happens if they do? And I guess if there is a House bill, Senator Sirotkin, you can go ahead with your UI bill, which is probably, since that's putting bread and butter on people's tables.
It's a workers' comp bill, but
Workers' comp,
we'll go
still,
ahead.
it's a little more personally, I think, for people imperative than getting UI, getting some connectivity out there. So, okay. So Commissioner, if you can get that to the committee, any questions for the Commissioner or Senator McDonald?
I'm trying to understand what the contracts permitted, what services were contained in those. And before I ask my questions, I want to say that the Commissioner is in a difficult position because there's money available and I'm sure she's encouraged to spend that money. And when we spoke prior to adjourning back in September, we had some, pretty much assurances that the money would be used to hook up people who were near service lines that were going by their houses, but they weren't hooked up, and that money would be used to extend lines that met the 50-50 symmetrical and were upgradable to 100-100 symmetrical, and that we were concerned about not building out new lines with capacities less than the 50-50 up to 100-100 symmetrical, because that would gobble up the take-up rates and make it more difficult to get symmetrical stuff later on. Are we authorizing the expenditure for contracts that do not meet that standard of 50-50 and 100-100? And do the contracts that have been let, does the contract say that the person receiving the subsidy, is obliged to have equal access by other providers consistent to our state goals.
So Senator, I'm making note of those questions. I'll have to dig into that, but I just want to make clear, and maybe this is clear and I'm just the one who's not clear. We are talking about contracts that were obligated well before December 20. They are the grant agreements that were authorized under Section 13 of Act 137 through the Connectivity Initiative. And there were a variety of technologies that were authorized for these contracts, everything from fiber to fixed wireless. And my memory is that 25.3 was authorized. Some of those
By
went
the federal government, yes.
Yeah, so I'll have to dig in to see which contracts we're talking about in that universe. But I'm not talking about new spending. I'm not talking about new contracts. I'm not talking about anything that that you haven't heard about before. All I'm talking about is being able to complete the work on those things that you've already heard about before, and recognizing that invoices on those contracts need to be paid in the course of their execution, and we're now past January 1. That's all. And beyond that, I'll get you the information that you asked for.
So
Sounds like we may not
appreciate
have,
that. I
yeah.
appreciate that, Madam Chair. What I'm seeking is to ensure that no money is being spent in these contracts, or to learn if money has been spent in these contracts to deliver services that are not 50-50 and symmetrical, upgradable to 100. And if they have been included in these contracts, I think we may be in the difficult position of having to approve them anyway, but I don't wish to approve them anyway if we can't, before approving such stuff, be reassured that we will not see contracts like that going out again in the ensuing couple months of weeks before this legislature adjourns, that don't meet the 50-50 and the 100-100 for new construction, and ignore or not incorporate the state goals of having our tax dollars spent that require some level of equal access. And I think there was one more thing that I won't bring up at this time. I can't remember at this time. So that was my concern. I'm not trying to, hammer away at the commissioner for doing her best, but I'm trying to put some guardrails around how additional money is spent. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to end this discussion because we're going to lose Steve Klein. And we may, as a committee, I have a different recollection of what we ended up with. I remember some discussions about nothing or have to wait for symmetrical. So I think the first thing we'll do is go over what we did and find out what did end up in the final bill, which in the end actually went through appropriations. And then we know what to judge the proposals and the continuation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look forward to the commissioner
Okay.
helping us see
All
what
right.
has been done. Thank
Randy,
you.
really quickly, because you're muted, Senator.
Commissioner, in the material that you give us, I wonder when you list the projects, if you could list what the project is, when it started, when it was supposed to be finished, and if it isn't finished, why?
I am making note of that, Senator.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to take us back to Steve, which won't be anywhere near as exciting. But
Is that my invitation to leave you, Madam Chair?
yes,
All right. In that
or
case,
run.
and we will be back to you as soon as practical.
Okay, we have you back on the agenda, I think, Friday.
Yeah, I'll try, but I'll try to
as
get you an answer
amongst other
sooner.
things, and if you're
Yeah.
not, you can email it to Faith and she'll get it to all of us if you have it sooner.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. I mean, I would just plead for your support on getting this this clarification, because it leaves the contractors in the field in a very bad place.
Yeah.
They have worked in reliance on us, on our word, and you're effectively looking at abrogating those contracts because time ran out.
Sounds like we have two
Because of the
different legal
sunset.
opinions and we're sitting in the middle. So
Absolutely. And
we'll
I
see
think,
where we go.
yeah, okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay. And for anyone who doesn't know, Guidehouse is the organization the administration has hired to help make sure that we followed the federal regulations and didn't end up in an audit and find out we had to send money back. So they're an outside firm that we have been paying. And to make sure we stayed on the straight and narrow, and it was their opinion that the commissioner was relying on. So we're going to have Steve talk about the sources and uses of the CRF funds. We left here with a lot of money in play. We appropriated a lot of it, but joint fiscal has been meeting a lot
So,
to make adjustments. The way the system works, the administration had to come to joint fiscal with a request to expend funds. We could reject it or accept it. That frequently left us with some negotiations and requests that they might want to resubmit. But there's been a lot of money at play, and in the last month, 6 weeks, there's been money that has been taken back because it wasn't going to be able to be used by the first of the year. Then everything got extended, and some of the folks said they could have used the money. So I thought it would be good just for us to know where the money came from, where it went, and how much it was before we start out.
okay, well, thank you very much. I'm Steve Klein from the Joint Fiscal Office. And I actually was going to do 3 things, and I can start with the sort. I have a spreadsheet that talks about the sources of uses, which I could do first. And then I know that you in your caucus last week talked about the new federal HR 133 money. And I can just talk about how that interplays with this. And then if we
Okay.
have time in the end, I can give you a preview of what's happening on the revenue front, because obviously we're in a very strange period now with the revenue forecast going to be happening a week from today. And just sort of, so we're getting a flavor of that. So if that's, should we go in that order, or do you want to do the new bill, or either way?
I think that's fine with me.
Okay.
I think we can, unless
Okay.
there's some questions.
Okay, so Faith, maybe we'll go back to the spreadsheet first that I given the introduction. So if we could put up the spreadsheet version.
Working on it. Steve, I'm working on it. My apologies.
Okay, no problem. And no, and I probably, if I knew how to do it myself, I would save you the work. But let me just talk a little bit about it while she's getting up. As you all know, the CRF bill, the big first CRF bill, was about a $5 billion impact in Vermont. We're going to talk about how that really affects tax revenues later. The $1.25 billion was the CRF funding that we had initially. And just to get to the punchline right now, it's about 4.2 million that's not obligated, 4.3 million that is still available. Interestingly enough, if you go to the treasurer's office and say how much is actually not been sent out, hold on, maybe I'll send you the link again just to make sure we're,
Steve,
that helps speed things
I
up.
apologize. Can you see this? It's up on my screen.
Yeah, no, it's not up on mine. Mine is an email from to Mark McDonald.
Can,
Whoops.
yeah. I have 2 screens now, and I'm struggling to make sure I get you on the right one. I have it, Steve. I apologize. Please keep talking and I'll get some help.
Okay. So anyway, so we had the 1.25 billion. We have about 4.3 million left. But if you go to the treasurer's office, they still have about 200 million that is yet to go out the door. So yesterday they put 10 million out the door. It's still, even though we've appropriated the money and we've, or joint fiscal approved the money, there's still a lag time between dollars going out. And the way the rules read is the money has to be obligated and essentially spent before the end of the year, but you have 90 days to pay it. So in other words, and that's sort of part of what you're dealing with is in this other issue with the broadband. And the other thing is that there is some latitude for changes in work orders and things like that. But so from the treasurer's perspective, they have $200 million is yet to hit the road. And what's interesting about that is when you get back to the tax side of things, all this money that, if you'd asked us 3 weeks ago, there was close to 500 million that hadn't gone out. So a lot of this impact of this on our economy has yet to really been experienced. So what we're seeing, and when we look at the forecast side, the impact of the money that already went out, but with knowing that there's another impact, let alone the new bill that came out. So, of course, I'm just seeing how we do. Oh, yes, great.
There it
So
is.
this is our spreadsheet. And so if you can see, I'm going to go through, you can go down a little bit. The 1.25 is our initial. We had 1.044 that was for legislative appropriations, and we held back 225 million for the Joint Fiscal Committee to deal with emergency allocations. And so you'll start seeing that there were some reversions of joint fiscal money. There was JFC approved spending. And this all happened earlier in the process before the most recent period. And so by October 22nd, you see this negative 2.8 balance. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then by this November 5th, you can see November 14th, we were down minus 4.2. So one of the things that happens here is we approve money, and then we know we're going to get FEMA money back. So sometimes the negative balance reflects an assumption at that point that we were going to get FEMA money to replace the CRF. And so and this is an administration spreadsheet. This is not ours. So it just gives you a flow of where the money is going. And one of the concerns of the spreadsheet is it's going to walk you through how we have the 4.3 million left. What it's not going to do is tell us where the money is in different accounts. And I'm going to come to that in a minute. So why don't we switch down to the next block, which is the so let's see what we have. You can start seeing joint fiscal approvals. We're still in the money that available from JFC approval, DCF remote learning. Then we available from ADS. These are things that were done before the last session. So this is sort of an earlier stage. And so, yeah, so this is sort of a balanced position, CRF balance as of before any reallocations. I'm trying to see what we did. Then in F1120, we increased testing money. This is the first really, after you went home, what happened. And you see the 8.5 million there. And if we switch down to the next block, I'm really going to focus on things that happened while you were not here. So can we go down to the
First big
next
thing
block?
was the additional testing money.
Yeah. So Faith, can you scroll down a little bit? She may have frozen. Let me tell you what's in the next block, and we'll hold on a minute. Okay, so I'm just going to line up here with what she's got on the screen. So then we Faith, what I don't know what
Steve,
happened
I
there.
apologize. My internet keeps going in and out.
Okay, so
And I
okay,
live
so
in
then
Chittenden County.
okay, no problem. And then so we did we approved more money for hazard pay. We
Please let me know where you'd like to be.
well, I'm sort of in the CRF balance position through December 7th. where it says 24 million. And then it's on the page, we're still in that document. We're on the page 2, I think it is. So we gave money to National Guard missions, Working Lands, emergency recovery grants, and Everybody Eats. You can see this auditor. You'll see this when it comes up, and then ADS, foster parents. And by December, we were sort of in a balanced position of about $6 million. There was some big appropriations for business assistance, I think about 75 million. The sheet will be up in a minute, you can look at it, but basically the last thing we did was approve money for $2 million for Australian ballots so that we can let the towns know that we'll cover the cost of mailing ballots prior to the town meeting. And this is normally JFC, once we got the extension, which we did as part of the new bill, they extended this money for another year. So you can use this money up until December 31st of FY21. So at that point, the language really said anything that was, because of that extension, the Joint Fiscal Committee should not act unless it was a crisis, unless it was something that had to be done right away. And that all the authority really would come back to the legislature to make any further allocation. So what you've seen is this 4.3 million on the bottom line, and all the other money that could be pulled out of appropriations is sort of sitting in appropriations. And that would be an example where at one point they were talking about taking 2 million from the broadband appropriation, but now it's still there and they're spending down needs. And there may be a little bit more money in that broadband appropriation that's available for doing other things with, but Joint Fiscal didn't take a role there. We have the same phenomena with education, where there may be as much as 14 million that has yet to be allocated from education. And rather than taking that to the bottom line, it just sits there. And so those committees will have to think about how that money is used. And AHS, same thing with the provider reimbursement. So we have this situation where this sheet tells us that 4.3 of undobligated. What the sheet doesn't tell you is how much is sitting in each line item. And so as you go through this with like when Joan Tierney comes back, or when you're talking to other state agencies, that's a really good question to ask, is sort of like, what do they have within their line items that's still available to be used? Because we're going to have to figure out, you're going to have to basically help us figure out where do you want to see that money allocated? And that's going to be a whole another step. And that gets even more complicated when we look at the new bill that just was passed. So maybe I realize this is a little, you don't have the sheet in front of you, but any sort of questions on that, or can I move on to the new bill?
Steve, can I say the biggest tension between Joint Fiscal and the administration, and probably the biggest grant, was the 75 million, and then the additional request for 10 million for business.
Right.
And the way the Agency of Commerce was doing it, and the tax department, because it went on your sales tax reports, was you said, this is my revenue last year, this is my revenue this year at the same time frame, and the difference was considered your economic need. It didn't consider whether or not you had laid off employees or cut back on purchase. It was very simple to administer, and when we started in the emergency, understandable. We just wanted to get as much money as we could out the door. As we went forward and we got the list of businesses that had gotten money, there were some good size accounting firms, some good size legal firms, some groups that you might think could have the resources to weather the storm better than the really impacted hospitality industry, downtown small retail. And so Joint Fiscal was trying to target that. And we did succeed, and we weren't 100% successful because you have to use their, I forget the term, but it's a code on your business registration and on your federal tax form as to what kind of business you are. But we did manage to cover 100% of the need through August, and all of this money was your need through August. We have done nothing because we ran out of money for any losses during foliage season or ski season. But we did cover 100% of the need for the hospitality industry as identified by code. The wedding planners and photographers still seem to be hanging out there. But
Yeah.
that's been, and we wanted to target the last bit of money to downtown retail. And we're convinced that we couldn't do it, but, or small retail. We knew we couldn't go by address, but that's been one of the big tensions is we didn't have enough money and wanted to have as much impact as possible. I think that's been the big one, right?
Yeah, and just, okay, one comment on that, and this is why it's going to come back to you, because there's a new needs to develop. One of the things about this pandemic, and that Joyce put an issue brief up, and you probably all know this, that 75% of the unemployed are women right now in Vermont. And we're more than the national average, and it's affecting different people in different ways. And so part of what we're learning now is, and part of the things you're going to deal with is just where do we need to put that, whatever we have left in money, and you know, A, do we put it in businesses? B, do we put it in equalization? Because one of the things this pandemic has done is really created and this is something you're going to hear when you work with Tom on next week. It's really had an impact on distribution of income and winners and losers and pretty serious stuff. And then the other thing that we'll talk about in a minute is the new federal money filled some holes, but created new ones. And so, you know, it's a really complex process. Joint Fiscal did what they could, but they left in the hands of the legislature of taking that next step.
And we are working on setting up a joint meeting, I believe, with the Propes with Tom Cavett. Probably a couple hours long and going into more depth than we normally do with, well, this is the, you know, the revenue forecast, because there's been some major economic changes through this pandemic, and there'll be changes coming out of it, good, bad, and indifferent. So, Senator Sorokin, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So very early on, I was singing off the same page as Tom Cavett, saying that, you know, the tension between targeting the money better to need versus getting money out the door was really the challenge. But what I don't understand now is when you say there's $4 million left, and that's unobligated by contract. There's more money that's obligated by contract, but no one's done any work on yet. I don't understand.
So what happened throughout this process is where there was money that could not be used for whatever the intended purpose is. Like, let's say we had appropriated money for something. The use had basically been filled. There was extra money. The administration brought that to the bottom line.
Right.
And so then right now we have about 4.3 million on the bottom line that is just unobligated available. Then what happened was there was a lot more money that the administration was talking about, say de-obligating. But when we got the extension from 1 year, December 30th to December 31 of the coming year, that process stopped. Basically, all the money was left within appropriations. So, for example, on the broadband, and I'm picking on that because you just talked about that, and I don't know if it's still there, but at the time there was $2 million that just had been appropriated by the legislature, but hadn't yet been spent. So it's still, it may be unobligated within that appropriation. It may today, that may have been different. There may be 14 million in the education fund that is not obligated, but it's still in the appropriation for that purpose. But the administration isn't bringing it down. You may decide, for example, this came up in joint fiscal. No, we want to see that money go out to schools, and then we don't want it to pull it out of education. We want you to, find a way to do it. But that's going to be a priority setting you're going to do, or, we want to spend more on broadband, or
So it's like a
housing
mini,
is a big
it's like a
problem.
mini, it's like a mini budget adjustment.
Yeah.
Yep.
And and there'll be reallocations, reprioritizations that you all have to play a role in.
Once that expansion went through, housing is probably the one that would interest you the most. We got an
Yeah.
email from Gus Seelig saying, well, if I'd known this was going to be expanded, I think it was 1 point something million that he had rescinded. He said, well, I can sure spend it, just not by January 1st. So if I'd known, what I now know 3 days after I sent it back.
It sounds like an interesting diversion in how to apply the rules between that and broadband. One commissioner says, I don't see how I can get it done by December 30th. The other one says, I might not get it done by December 30th, but I'll let the money out. And if I don't, I'll see what happens down the road. And
It's,
one's a winner, one's not.
So, I mean, and there is a way, there are certain categories like public safety being the big one, a good part of human services that we could use CRF money for and haven't, but that would free up general fund. So the appropriations people have been interested looking at the budget deficits that we've been projecting at trying to preserve some funding so that we don't find ourselves cutting holes in safety nets again. So
I think one of the ironies here is we're going to be facing the same thing when we get the third COVID relief bill.
Mhm.
Then we're going to
Yes.
say, well, we would have done it differently if we knew
Yeah.
this was coming in,
Yeah. And yeah, this is another place where there is no map and we are all learning as we go. Okay, Senator Hardy.
Thank you. Just one comment, if you're looking for the spreadsheet, it's online, and
Yeah, it
if
is.
you're able to pull it up online, you can look at it on your own without having to do share the screen.
Great.
Sometimes that's easier because then we can all see each other. The second thing, a question just sort of on process, and I don't know if this is for Senator Cummings or for Steve. If we are reallocating some of these monies from existing appropriations, will we be doing that with the budget adjustment bill? I mean, can we do it during the budget adjustment process, or would that be during the normal budget, which will be
So
for a few months?
these are really good questions, and I don't know the leadership's figured out. There's a couple things to keep in mind. We think the total dollars that are reallocating of capacity is somewhere between 10 and 30 million. It's not like, we were dealing with 1.25 billion before. This is not a big number. And the other problem is you're going to be, do we do a separate bill? Well, it's really going to be, that may or may not make sense because it's so small and it's really in balkanized areas. So it could be done in budget adjustment. It could be further budget adjustments in the big bill, but or it could be a separate bill. The problem is you want to get it out quick so you can do things like, the things that take time, the broadband, the housing. So I think there's an incentive to do it in budget adjustment, but there's also an incentive to do separate bills. So this is something you all are going to have to figure out.
Okay.
There's no clarity on that yet.
Okay, and then I have one more question, just follow up to something you said, Steve, about 75% of the people who are unemployed are women. And this has been a concern of mine throughout the pandemic, as I'm sure it has for most of us. And I'm wondering if anybody has done work, maybe Senator Sorokin knows this as well, to sort of break down those numbers and see what sectors they're coming from. Where were those women employed and where are they now unemployed from, as a means for potentially looking at targeting that money more in order to help this gender inequality that's happening.
We just within the hour got a report from Joyce Manchester. I haven't opened it yet, but I'll forward it to you.
Great, thank you.
So maybe I could switch to the issue brief on the HR the new
I
money.
think Senator McDonald's got a question.
Yeah.
It just, we're falling into the trap that we get into often when Steve rightly says, when we haven't gotten the money out to do something that we want to do, we get it out for another purpose.
Yeah.
And he gave an example of broadband. Okay, our goals for broadband are in statute. The money that we get out for broadband, 25.3, is not our goals and undermines our, and may undermine our broadband plan for getting symmetrical broadband out. That's the trap we fall into, and we can fall into it again tomorrow if we don't get a handle on that. Thank you.
So if I could switch, Faith, and I don't know if we can do this to the, otherwise I'll tell people where it is, the Economic Development Stimulus Package Issue Brief. Okay, perfect. That's it. So we can make that bigger. And this is just an attempt to talk about HR 133, which was passed and actually signed on December 31st. And now we have, first of all, the numbers in this bill, this is a really recent bill. The numbers are changing daily. So you'll see January 11th, we expect a new set of numbers tomorrow or later today. But let me just, like the CARES bill funding, there's a ton we don't know. Numbers change, impacts change. And the big problem we're going to have here is, and as you just talked about, that how it's going to be appropriated is unclear. One of the problems is right now, any guidance we get is from the Trump administration. When we get a week from now, we might start getting guidance from the Biden administration. And then there's a very good chance there'll be a further relief bill, which may modify this bill, just as happened. So, we're living in a world like we did before, where you start off with one path and then the path changes. And we're going to see that when we get to renter assistance, because that's the poster child for a real problem. It was coupled with the federal budget. So one interesting thing about this bill is the federal budget for FY21 and the relief bill are all the same bill. And so just as much as the agencies are finding opportunity in the relief bill, there's also additional money appropriated in the federal budget. And there's some of that in broadband. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing is, the big deal is it extends the time of using the CRF funds, as we talked about that, and that gave you another year. And so while a lot of it's been spent, we have a little bit left. You're going to probably take testimony on what's available. And then I think, as Senator McDonald pointed out, you're going to make decisions about how to use that money. And then you can also make decisions about moving money around between allocations that remain unspent. And in some cases, there'll be some back and forth with relief funds, and I'm going to talk about that next. And this is sort of the first relief bill was like, we think about a $5 billion number for the impact on the economy. The second one is somewhere between 1.4 and 2.5. And part of the thing is that the 1.4 includes the money that we're going to spend, about 650 that's coming through state appropriations and state, some appropriations, some just going to be allocated. Then you get to this question about, the UI money that come in, and then the one-time to individuals. When you add all that up, comes to the 1.4. Then all the PPP money, and there's some special money for cultural organizations, and SBA has got a bunch of money. That's not coming in through the state at all. So unlike the first load, where ACCD played a really big role in allocating business assistance, most of that's going to be PPP and SBA. And one of the things we can think about is, do we use some of our existing money to promote the new federal money, making sure that people take advantage of it. And that goes to this question about, since a lot of that money is going to go out to cultural organizations, arts, things like that, they may or may not, that may be harder for them to access that. So that's going to be a question to deal with. Let's slide down to the next point where we get into the actual where this money is going. And so I talked about the fact that the guidance and the regulation disbursement is going to be an ongoing issue. The rental assistance is one of the ones that's the most sort of poster child for confusion, because in that one, what they did is they took the same distribution formula that we had in the CRF fund. And so in that formula, as you remember, Vermont got $2,000 per capita. New York, Texas, and states like that got $389 per capita because of a small state minimum. So we got the same sort of breakout. So it's about, if we got 200 million, other bigger states got a much smaller amount for on a per capita basis. So we're going to be the 200 million is a big number, and so the question is, how do we spend it? And it's much more. It has much more restrictions than our earlier money. It's tied to rental assistance. It's tied to income levels, and so one of the questions that comes in, there's no. We may have a problem of building facilities like shelters, like we did last time. We used a lot of money for homeless shelters and for renovation of buildings. This money can't be used for that. So then one of the questions says, well, do we marry this money with some of the extra CRF money that is available in order to help make it easier to utilize this? The other question that comes up is, where we did rental assistance with the CRF money, could we take some of this money and use it to backfill and then free up CRF money for other purposes? So these are things that are being questions that are coming up. They may or may not be possible. Administration, part of this is going to be called is how much risk you're willing to take, because all these choices are going to involve, once again, assessments of risk. And we're assessing risk in a world where today the guidance might be different than down the road, or the other thing that could happen is the next bill might say, hey, we're going to give you more latitude on rental assistance, or not. The way this works is any unobligated rental assistance as of September 30th in Vermont just goes to other states. So it's once again a question of how do we use it, how can we be creative in how we use it, and whatever we don't use will go to other entities. We have 8 million in vaccines, 36 million in testing. If you looked at that number on our webpage yesterday, the number would have been 212 million, but there was we got a revised number, and this is part of one of the things we're dealing with, is that number changes. So we think together 45 to 50 million for those, and I talked to HS about that. It's probably enough to cover, and this could change, but it could cover the tracing, testing, mitigation for 3 to 6 months, and there'll probably be a need for more, but that's one of the things they're hoping for is further bills. The education money is a big deal. We got about 127 million. 10% of that, or 13 million, the governor can we can work with and use under certain conditions, and there's quite a bit of flexibility for that. The other money has to go out to schools and pretty much a Title I formula, but they can use it in a very broad way. So one of the questions would be, if there's a fiscal, like we have a shortfall in the ed fund, or if we have a tax rate, do we just allow that money to be spent by schools in exchange for reducing what the state provides? That would be one option there. But we're going to talk about that in a minute because of the revenue situation, which may obviate the need to do that. Higher education, we got about 34 million. About 12 of that went to, that one's allocated by institution. I think UVM got about 10.9 or so, 10.4. The state colleges each got individual amounts, but together it's in the neighborhood of 12 or 13 million. Some of that's reserved for students, and some of it's for the institution. So whatever the state colleges got will be, most of it will be pretty helpful for meeting the needs of the transitions there. There's some more money for mental health. There's going to be more money for transportation, 82 million. That's going to come through existing lines. So one of the things that's happening in every one of these areas, people are going to have to think about how this money gets used. And it comes back to the question you all had said earlier about, does it come in budget adjustment? I think the transportation money probably will. It's unclear. I don't think people have really worked that through. And when we look at the budget adjustment, you're going to deal with the base needs, where we have needs that are maybe in the $3 to $5 million range, and it will be a normal budget adjustment. And then you have this whole thing about how do we allocate these new federal dollars, and how does it affect how we allocate the CRF money? So there are a lot of smaller sources. There's $50 a month assistance for broadband, and we haven't really figured out how much Vermont gets or how we get that. That's an example where we just don't have the data. And there's some links down below, which is a fund breakdown of how much comes to Vermont. You can see that. And then NCSL has a link to both the COVID relief bill and the budget, the $1.4 trillion omnibus funding bill. So I could go through those, but why don't I stop there and just see questions, spark any questions, or before I go on to more stuff.
Okay, any questions, Senator Sirotkin?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was confused by the term you said, marry some of the new money with the old money. What allows you to do that?
Well, because you're an appropriate, the legislature can appropriate money. So
Okay.
let's say I'll stick with the rental subsidy, subsidy. If you know that money can go for renter subsidies, but our problem may be we need more units. Yeah. And so let's say you took some of the old CRF money and use that to expand rental housing in exchange, and then subsidize people getting into that housing with some of the new money. Maybe there's ways of being creative that way. I don't know. It's more just looking at the various resources. And as the chair mentioned, you can create general fund with CRF money, by running it through corrections. So part of this is just figuring out how the different types of resources can be linked together to produce the best outcomes. There's no real, and again, you're doing it like you did last time, where the guidance is going to change, the uses of funds are going to change, and you're in a constantly changing world.
What is there a deadline similar to December 30th in this bill?
The thing is, every section has its own deadline. This is very different. Last time you had a big chunk of money with a December 30th deadline. Here you have the renter assistance. We know we have till September 30th to use it, or we lose it to other states. There's education money too, I think has a different deadline, but we need to sort of obligate it. So we're going to have to, in each subject, be cognizant of what they put in the way of requirements.
I thought the rental assistance was an 18-month look back or something to that effect.
I think there's a look back, look forward, but you have to essentially obligate it and know what you're going to do with it by September 30th. So it may not mean that you have to have it all spent by then. It just means you have to plan or put in statute what you're doing.
Thank you.
Senator Bray.
Madam Chair, so can you fill me in since I'm new to this process here? So I'm just trying to understand it's great to be learning more about these funds that I've heard about, but not heard about in this detail before. But since appropriations has to make appropriations, is this because if they can't fill a gap, then they'll be looking to finance to maybe find revenues to fill that gap? I mean, or do you end up advising? Does this committee send advice across the hall to approach, or what's the relationship? If you could just fill me in a little bit how it's going to work.
It's
I can
complicated.
jump in first. Either way, you can. I think the first answer is we don't. Committee has, just like the environmental, natural resources at times had opinion on spending for that area. This committee has certain subject areas that you've been quite involved with, and one of them is broadband, for example, public service related issues. And so to the extent that you have areas of coverage, or education finance is another one where you guys have been very involved. And so the Appropriations Committee is not going to make these decisions, I would think, in isolation. They are going to turn to the committees. And as you point out, you have goals in your various subject areas. So it's going to be how it all works together is where I fall short. So Senator Cummings, you may know more than I know on that.
Yeah, I think even more than broadband, education funding. And some of us had some upsetment when we were told there was $14 million being rescinded from the education allocation because they couldn't spend it. And I'm saying, so that means every school in the state has a new HVAC unit. You know, and why, and we're going to have that discussion tomorrow about why wasn't that money spent? Where is it? I know that the House Ways and Means, and we're going to be working too on trying to figure out if some of this CRF money and if some of this new money we can have fall to the bottom line to cover the costs that could offset the projected tax increase. And so, you know, and pre-K and all the rest of it that this COVID has shown us is necessary. And so why couldn't we spend that money, and how do we do it? And how is there a way to get it so that it can offset property taxes? I think
Yeah.
we're
Yeah,
pretty
and
sure
let me-
revenues are going to be up more than they were in October, but probably not enough to offset the
Well,
9 cents.
so let me take education example, because that is the area where I want to. So and we don't know what the revenues are exactly, I think, but we may be if you think about the two big education fund issues right now, or two of them anyway. One is there's actually many more, but one is the 58 million left of the shortfall from last year. And then the next one is a 9-cent tax rate increase, which might be roughly 75 million, 72, 75 million. So between those two, you're at about $133 million of just, you know, you would probably like to solve those, you know, maybe not, you know, but that's the thought. There's other things out there that you're going to be dealing with, like waiting and stuff like that. So then, now the one thing we know is through December, the education fund revenue is about tracking about 40. Let me just double check and make sure I have this right number. It's 42 million over forecast. So now there's a pretty good likelihood that the number for this year will be, and we'll know this in a week or so when Tom does his forecast, and I'm sort of getting a little ahead of the apple cart a little bit here, but it could be in the neighborhood of $70 million. And this is just for this year. And since a lot of that is sales tax generated, it could be close to that for next year. So when you start adding that money, that can be you may be able to solve the whole shortfall with revenue. And then that frees up the federal money for other things. And one of the things that's out there is the money can be used for everything from mental health, which is an issue, you know, both in the education fund and outside of it. It can be used for school construction and PCBs and control of environmental issues. It's much broader than just COVID. So we can give you the language at some point. You'll get the language on this and you can look at it. So one of the whole questions is, how do you take the new revenue forecast plus the new Freedom federal resource, plus, as Senator Cummings just pointed out, some of the existing money you've given out in CRF may produce savings for the ed fund. How do you take all those three together and figure out where you want to be? So it's going to be it's another one of those complex sort of interrelationships. I'm not going to stay away with the word marriage, but figuring that all out. And you're going to begin that tomorrow. That'll be a big issue. I think there's a pretty good chance the education fund will be exceeding the forecast of last January. I mean, we may be. It's pretty dramatic what's happened in the way of resources there. General fund is also going to be up a fair amount. We were 110 million over forecast through December. A good chunk of that is ongoing. Well, at some point, you want to bring in Graham to talk about this problem we're having with the PPP money and how it affects how it may be create sort of a lot of repayments to businesses and things like that. Yeah. I was stopping because I saw a hand.
Madam Chair, is that all right? Steve.
I'm back my half inch. You can't hear me.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Steve, we fall into this trap that revenue is up, and that, but the projection is way down. So whenever you're talking to
Yeah.
us, it would really help me if we could have a reference point of, if you want to reference the projection, that's fine, but could we also reference last year?
Yeah.
So
And
that
so-
we get a more normalized
Yeah.
counting.
And right. And part of my problem, and you're right, and I just want to say, I probably should stop on the revenue up because we're a week away from the forecast. And so I'm just giving you a sense of what we're seeing. There is, you're right. But I think even when we look at the forecast, and we are creating a chart, which right now we put in dummy numbers that, but we'll be able to lay out exactly that. Because what if you look in our back room, when we're sitting there putting all the numbers on paper, it looks like that in the FY21 and FY22, you'll probably be able to cover things those 2 years. But then when you hit 23, you'll be back to a pretty sizable, issue in your budget situation. So you're right. It's not the world isn't better forever. It's just we're in a possibly a 2-year chunk of you're going to have relative resources for a couple years. The other complicating factor, I just want to flag, is, and this is the Washington factor, that with the Democrats taking over the Senate, you've got Leahy who's chairing the Appropriations Committee, and Sanders is chairing the Budget Committee. And so that's a really strong delegation. So we don't really know what that's going to do to Vermont and what that's going to do to our capacity. And just to give you some other areas where it'll affect your work and our work is in healthcare. We've got a couple really big waivers that the ACO waiver and the global commitment waivers, they're going to have to be renewed the next year or so. They were already doing renewal discussions with the current administration. Well, maybe there'll be ways to creatively use that to cover some of your healthcare related, aspirations, and that'll be an area which needs to be looked at. So, but you're right, we're still in this situation, and I don't want to be. If anything, it's going to be another thing where you're going to have a relatively, you're going to be in good shape for a year or two, but then underlying problems aren't going away.
I think I remember hearing back in June, maybe August, that a lot of people seem to have taken those original stimulus bills or payments and put them into some major purchases.
Yeah.
And that really helped the Ed Fund. We've got another set of checks, I guess, that are in the mail. But eventually, and we've got the additional unemployment, which for some people on minimum wage, they're making money. But that's all going to go away.
Mhm.
And then, probably in a year or two, we'll be back to, unless we can do some major economic pickup between now and then. So Senator Sirotkin. No, Michael, you're muted.
On the PPP program, I know one of the big helps for business has been that the grants are not going to be taxable now. Is that true on the state level as well?
Yeah, I'd like to refer that to, and maybe if I've got to get off at 2:45, it turns out, but maybe I could have Graham answer that. I think he's on the call somewhere, but he's been spending a lot of time researching that, and that's a huge issue. So can we hold that question for a few minutes? And is Graham, is he on? I think I saw him
I
earlier.
don't see Graham on this
Okay.
screen.
Okay,
You
I
want me
can
to, Graham?
see if he can come in. But the answer is yes, that's going to be affecting passes through to Vermont, and it could be a hit on our revenues anywhere from, let me look, it's big numbers.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the part I've done? Yeah.
Okay, Senator Bray.
So I have a question. It's probably, and it's good that Senator Sirotkin's here. I mean, I think I heard him say in caucus today that the administration is proposing to freeze the rates for unemployment insurance and to not charge any layoffs against their experience rating. So I'm just wondering, we started out with a very robustly rebuilt unemployment insurance trust fund, but we've been spending out of it at a record rate. And I'm just wondering when we see that elevator dropping fast enough that someone's going to say, for keeping the thing afloat, we have to start raising rates there and add yet another pressure.
Or they'll want to cut benefits.
So, yeah. Has everybody? No, I'm not
Sure.
frozen. Okay.
Sarah Bray,
I
are you
was-
asking for the status of the fund?
Yeah, so in part, it's like, what's the status of the fund? And since it is spending down faster than normal, because we don't usually charge this many people off against it so fast and for so long. I know that a decade ago, we had to raise rates in order to be in compliance, and the feds were telling us that we needed to do that, and we did it. We got into good shape prior to all this. But I'm just wondering how much tank we have, how much gas we have left in the tank before we need to start recharging at a higher rate in order to not go outside some sort of boundaries for solvency.
This is probably, you should have the labor folk and DOL people in, but we did get a bunch of federal money. So it's that money funds through the fund. So a lot of your costs are being absorbed by the federal government. So you're actually not, we started with a very healthy fund. My sense, when we looked at this number in joint fiscal, and I can actually send to Faith the documents we received in December on this, but it's not, given what just happened with the extra federal money, I think you're in pretty good shape for a while. But we'll have to let the department respond.
Okay, well, great. Good. That's good news. I just wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
These are
So I
all-
guess if it's okay, I'll sign off, and then if Graham, I don't know what you have next.
Have we found you're it for today. Have we found
Oh,
Graham?
no, I'm so, yeah.
I sent
can-
Graham an email and haven't heard from him.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll send him a note, but I've got to go to the next committee, and I'll, so if I can't, I'll send you a note, Faith, if I find Graham.
Thank you.
So committee, Faith and I try and meet Thursdays to put together next week's agenda. So anything you'd like, it looks like we'll be having more discussions about the request for that broadband. It looks like the House has started some kind of a bill on that one. And I'm sure there'll be some questions or issues come out of the discussion tomorrow on the tax rates. And it also looks like it may be a while before we know if town meetings get put off until May, until we've got the bulk of the budgets passed. It's going to be pretty hard for us to set the yield or, even know what that is, unless budgets do start to come in. I'm concerned that we haven't spent the money, given the school conditions report we got last year, where it sounded like we have schools that are in pretty shameful condition. And if we've got money that can be used for making schools healthier, which probably means getting that swamp from next door that's draining into one school basement removed, might be a good time to look at doing radon testing, because lead in the water was relatively inexpensive to fix, depending on your school construction. Radon, I know from a house, it's usually about $2,000, unless it's a slab. And then you've got major issues. So depending on your school construction, it could be a very costly. But also, the more we tighten the schools up, for weatherization, the more critical radon gets to be. So I got Senator Pearson and Senator Hardy.
Madam Chair, I'm just curious. I've been thinking about the radon issue, which has bounced around a little bit over the last few years, but maybe hoping there could be some federal money, and was wondering about putting in that bill. Do you have that bill, or are you interested in it? There has been a radon bill over the last few years that has never advanced.
Yeah, I think my hesitation with radon is just the potential cost of fixing it. And once we know, we're liable.
Yeah, but ignorance is not a great excuse, and there's a real health.
No, it
issue
isn't.
for teachers in particular who are there year after year.
They're there year after year, and it is. And that's why I was hoping we could get some HVAC out of this stuff. I know Montpelier High School was known as a petri dish and finally had to break down and put in some ventilation and circulation. And it was a new school relative for Vermont. And I haven't heard the same complaints, but there were a number of years where everybody was sick. So I want to know why. Well, you know what it was like getting information out of the Department of Ed last year. Why we couldn't spend it, and what funds are still available, and what can we use them for? So Senator Hardy.
Yeah, just picking up on that theme, I was trying to find out from the information Steve got us, what are the funds that were not spent, if they were the ones that were for the ventilation systems. I know one of the problems that we took testimony on last year in the Education Committee was the ability to get these projects done in time, because they were major construction projects for some schools, and there was a shortage of contractors and also supplies. There was a supply chain issue with some of the stuff they needed to do those ventilation projects. I think it's kind of similar to what we were seeing with these contracts with broadband, is that these were major projects with contractors and lots of supplies that may have been the delay, but I'll be interested to hear more details. In terms of the radon and the PCP thing, I know that Senator Perchlik and I believe Senator Bray, they were talking about a broader look at toxics in public buildings. And it would be great to tackle these issues together and not just do them as a one-off where we did lead and we did that and felt all good about it. And now we're going to do radon and PCPs, but really looking at the broader issue of toxics in our school buildings, in the air, the water, the materials. And Senator Pearson, if you're interested, I definitely encourage you to talk to Senator Perchlik, because he and I have had a lot of conversations about this and he knows quite a bit about it. And I'm just putting in a plug as a former Education Committee member that maybe we do some joint meetings with the Education Committee so that we can be on the same page about the priorities for education funding, because I know that they have some bills that are coming their way about the weighting study and that type of thing. And I think we need to be really working together. I certainly have a lot of opinions about it and would like us to sort of have a full conversation about it. So anyway, thanks.
I try and hold us to our expertise, and that is the tax rate or the ed fund. And that's where we get into discussion. Senator Bray, and then Graham has joined us.
Sure. So to Senator Hardy's point, I mean, natural resources will be visiting again. There's sort of the onslaught that we face with different chemicals. The initials change year by year by year, but there's a whole slew of things that we bring out in commerce that end up, they are poisons for us some way or another. And so we'll keep plugging away. On radon, it might be interesting to talk to Senator Baruth, because when I was on education, so term before last, radon came all the way up to a bill ready to go. We had taken testimony on cost per unit and stuff like that. And it actually was fairly reasonable, but there was no money to be found, and it just languished. And then the biennium ended Then we came back and lead had come to the fore. So radon got pushed to the back burner. But it's still an issue in some schools, especially as Senator Pearson was saying, for staff that are there for 10, 15, 20 years. Not that it's better for kids who are only there for 5, 6, or 7 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues out there that we're going to be looking at.
Right.
Okay,
one of the
and-
quick things- sorry to interrupt, the weatherization piece too should really be integrated into this, because good weatherization addresses indoor air quality, period, whether it's a radon issue or it's something else. So, I think we have to get more of these dominoes lined up or something like that.
And we had the mold and other issues that are in schools too. So we have an old school buildings. I think Montpelier's new, and it was built before I moved here in the mid 70s. I don't think we've built much since the late 60s. So we have some issues. Graham, you're with us. There you are.
Yes.
Yes. And I am trying to remember what Steve said we should have you talk about, because we have been all over the place today. Oh, last topic. I know health and welfare, there's bills floating around about toxics. So we may end up with one mega bill at some point, but should definitely coordinate. Yes, the PP, no, there's too many PPs. The loans, which are now going to be tax exempt, the revenue impact, I think that's what Steve said you'd been doing some work on.
Yeah, absolutely. For the record, my name is Graham Campbell. I work at the Joint Fiscal Office. Our office has been tracking a lot of the provisions within HR 133, which is the latest stimulus the bill that came out around Christmas time this past year. And one of the tax provisions within that bill was a section that said that if a business used or took a PPP loan from a bank and used that money to pay expenses, those expenses would be deductible under traditional deductibility rules. And combined with that provision and the provision in the CARES Act, which also said that PPP money in general, if it's forgiven, the loan, that money itself is not taxable income. What that in effect creates is kind of a double deduction of sorts. And there is, at least amongst our office, I'm not sure the extent of the tax department at the moment, but certainly amongst departments of revenue around the country. And I've seen an article in a tax publication that's put out talking about the potential for quite large state revenue impacts due to that provision. And the way that happens is, if you think about how businesses deduct certain costs, imagine you had a business that had $100 in a typical year of net revenue that they've made in sales, and they deduct against those costs. So in a typical year, let's say they have $50 worth of payroll expense, and so when they deduct that $50 from their $100, they have $50 worth of taxable income, and that's what goes. So it's subject to personal income tax rates if you're a pass-through, and corporate income tax rates if you are a corporation. Now, under the Pay Loan Protection Program, imagine the business had very little or zero actual revenue during the year, and $100 of the revenue was forgiven PPP loan money. Now, essentially what happens, because PPP loans are considered not taxable, this business looks like it has zero taxable income. And furthermore, because the provisions in the latest stimulus bill says that any expenses you paid for with that PPP money are deductible. If you use the PPP money to pay for your employee costs, then it's, in effect, this company gets to deduct again and their net income becomes -50. So what we are concerned about is a lot of businesses being able to deduct away whatever small or large amounts of net income they have because on sort of two fronts. The first is that they don't have actually that much net income in general because a big chunk of their income might be PPP loan forgiveness, which isn't considered taxable at all. And on the back end, they're using that money to make payroll and other expenses, which are deductible under this new bill. And so we are worried that we're going to see a very big depression of our net income from businesses. To give you a sense of the scale here, I mean, Vermont businesses took $1.2 billion worth of pay loan protection program loans. And if you believe that all of them are using it correctly, then almost all of that is being used for deductible expenses. And so you're talking about quite a lot of deductible expenses being reducing net income. And so our office is trying to quantify what that means for our revenue impacts, but it could be, very significant to the tune of tens of millions of dollars on personal and corporate income tax revenues. And so we're working with the tax department to figure out and talking with other states about how large that might be. But I think Steve might have brought it up, and because it's something that keeps me and him up at night, but in terms of how it affects the forecast, going forward, one thing that we think is potentially happening is that since this new provision was passed in December, it's possible that businesses from the month of March through December were sort of withholding taxes as if they thought that the expenses they were paying were not going to be deductible. And so they were essentially paying taxes on that basis. Now, with knowing that those expenses are deductible, we are worried that those businesses have now technically overpaid for the tax year, and we might see a significant amount of refunding occurring in April from both pass-through and corporate income taxpayers. So there's a lot that could potentially impact our revenues here. I don't have a whole lot more to say about that, but I think in the context of our revenues right now, we're running quite a bit over our August forecast. And there's a lot to indicate that some of that strength will be there going forward, particularly on the consumption taxes. But we're sort of quite nervous at the moment about this provision and how it might affect our corporate and personal income tax revenue for this year and future years, because you can carry losses forward.
Okay. That was my question, is you can carry it forward in some taxes. So if they're in a negative, we could be paying them back, over time. Okay, and on the other hand, we do tax your unemployment income.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. It's withheld by the Department of Labor.
Okay, Senator Hardy.
Business as usual.
Graham, I just want the business and personal income tax that you're talking about, that all goes to the general fund. Is that correct?
That's correct. So you have two types of business. You have pass-through businesses like S corps and LLCs. They pay through the personal income tax, and then you have the corporate income tax, which C corps pay. Both go to the general fund.
Okay, and Steve was just kind of giddy about the potential increase in tax revenue, but this sounds like this is a negative to that potential increase. I'm assuming you're taking this into consideration in the revenue forecast that you're putting out next week. Is that correct?
So yes, we don't make the forecast, but we will be advising the state legislature economist Tom Cavett on this. I think in general, it's it could be a very, very large number. I don't see it totally washing out the strength that we have. I mean, there's a lot of strength in the general fund that isn't related to the income taxes. For instance, the property transfer taxes is really doing well right now. The estate tax is doing quite well. And so, and quite frankly, we're up around $100 million between the two income taxes right now. You know, I can't say that the scale of this deduction thing will be, you know, less than 100 million, but that would be towards the higher end of what I would be saying. So it would make sense to me to see an upgrade even in the general fund for fiscal year 21. It is something that we have spoken to Tom Cavett about, that we think, you know, is a reason for caution on revenues. And the other thing I'll add is that this is just one of many things that the economists are factoring in. For instance, they need to somehow predict what the next stimulus bill, if there's going to be one, how it might flow through, you know. And so it's possible, for instance, if Congress passes a very large stimulus bill in the next 2 months, that might offset, you know, this potential revenue down. So our job as the Joint Fiscal Office is to advise them about these types of, you know, issues, and they can decide whether it's going to be offset or whether it's going to be an important part of their forecast or not.
Sandra Bray, I gotta-
Graham, does the state have any discretion over the tax provisions, or is this entirely, again, it's federal money, so the tax treatment is federally mandated entirely? For instance, on the carry forward, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So with regards to this specific provision about the deductibility of PPP expenses, it is totally within Vermont's right to what we call decouple from such a thing. So essentially say, if you're a business, you could either make PPP loan forgiveness taxable and then allow for the deductibility of those expenses, or you could keep the tax-free nature of the actual loan forgiveness and then not allow the deductibility on the back end. And so Vermont has that discretion. You can do it. I'm not aware of any state that's done that yet, but a lot of states are still trying to digest what the scale here is. And it brings up a larger question of what we call conformity to the federal income tax code. Vermont has sort of what we call rolling conformity, which means that we sort of, unless we specifically decouple from these things, then they'll sort of flow through to us. But there's nothing that would stop the legislature from choosing any of the provisions in any of the CARES Act or the stimulus bill and decoupling. Another good example is the December stimulus bill, HR 133, allows for a $300 to $600 charitable deduction that happens prior to the adjusted gross income. That, absent any legislative action, will trickle through to Vermont. And what that in effect will do is allow Vermont taxpayers to double dip on their charitable deductions, because they'll get a deduction pre-AGI, and then they'll be able to take Vermont's 5% charitable tax credit on those same deductions. So those are the types of things that you know, I think Abby and I will highlight for the committee in due course. But I think there's lots of, you know, some big provisions, a lot of small provisions that I think the legislature can decide whether they want to link up to those, or whether they want to require an add back or different treatment of that income.
And one of
Those of you that missed all the fun when we redid the tax code to respond to the federal tax cuts, the charitable deduction was highly controversial. But we have another bill exempting federal retirement benefits. I think it's come through every year since then, military retirement benefits. So I'm sure we're going to be looking at it again. I think I saw Senator Bray and then Senator Sirotkin.
So the quick follow-up is the stock market boomed last year. So did we see a lot of people cashing in, and are we expecting a surge in revenue related to capital gains, or too early to know?
I would say it's a mix of too early to know, but but whiffs of strength. We don't know what people's capital gains are for the tax year that we're currently in until they file their tax returns and say this is how much capital gains I have. What we do know is for a lot of high income filers, they make estimated payments 4 times a year. And what we've seen so far is that estimated payments from a lot of high income taxpayers have been large. And that is an indication of potential capital gain strength. And looking at how the market has done over the past year, that's a good indication. And it's sort of a continuation of what we've seen the past 2 tax years. So tax year 19 was a very strong year for capital gains. Tax year 18 was an equally strong year for capital gains. And so there, I would say that the betting money, if you will, would be on 2020 being also a very good year for for capital gains.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Senator Sirotkin, are you with us? Yep. Michael,
So,
there you go.
I'm sorry. So my question was, if you're going to be doing an analysis, as you are, on the tax deductibility of the PPP loan forgiveness, can you start thinking also about the tax deductibility on the extension of the UI payments? And also, is the $600, is that taxable to people?
Yeah, so all unemployment insurance benefits are taxable.
So I'd like to know the numbers as to how much it would cost the state if we remove the taxability on the $600 and the extended UI benefits.
Yeah, I can do that. So it's the deductibility of just the extra 600 or the entirety of it?
Well, I mean, I guess we should know it all. I mean, I know we've dealt with taxability of UI benefits in the past, but I'm specifically wanting to know if there's going to be a large hit on the revenues of the state because of the Fed's treatment of the PPP forgiveness. I'd like to know what it would be if on the state if we made it tax deductible for those UI payments and the $600 checks.
Okay, I can work on that. I can say off the top of my head that I think it would be a large number. But because I know that the amount of unemployment benefits and the extra 600 have been in the tens of millions of dollars over the past year. So, I'll do some analysis to come up with a more precise number for you, but I would say it would be quite large.
I'm just looking for the UI extension.
Okay, yeah.
And the $600, not stuff in 2020. Or when did the $600 check get issued?
In March. So it was March through.
I'm talking about the new one.
Oh, the new one.
Got mine yesterday.
Okay, yeah, just the new.
Just the new one. So not the previous tax year, just the new $300.
Right.
That's the stimulus check, right? Not the UI.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about the stimulus check as one pot, and then that new CARES bill extended unemployment benefits for 11 weeks.
Yeah, because I know the stimulus last time came through as a tax return, so it was not taxable. I don't know what they did with the 600, the next one. If that's taxable or not.
Yeah, so the rebate checks, so the stimulus checks that lots of people received, the $1,200 or whatever, that was in the CARES Act, that was not taxable income. The $600 that people are receiving, the stimulus checks now, are not taxable. It is confusing because the UI benefit was $600 a week in the CARES Act. So we're talking about 2 different 600s here.
Okay, so the new 600 stimulus lump sum check is not taxable.
It's correct. It's not taxable.
Okay.
So is that what you were referring to, or are you talking about 600?
That's what I was
from the
referring
UI?
to. That's what I was.
Okay. Yes. No. The
I would like
$600 that families receive if they had certain income levels, that is not taxable income.
But I would like to know this new UI extension and PUA extension, if we made those benefits non-taxable, how much that would set us back.
Graham, Senator Cummings, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so just following up on that, maybe I'm getting confused here, but so we started out talking about how the PPP money, the way that it's come into businesses and the way they can deduct it means that it's basically not taxable to businesses. And what Senator Sorokin was just talking about, the UI payments, they are taxable. So essentially the help that businesses got from the government is not taxable, but the help that individuals got from the government is taxable. Is that correct? Just on a basic level?
Why tax?
Yes, it's mostly correct. If anything, I would say it's even more on the business side. It's not taxable income on the business side. So the PPP loan is not taxable at all. Plus, you get to deduct the expenses that you use. So it's in effect a double benefit.
Right. So we have a double benefit for businesses and a negative for individuals who are unemployed. That just does not seem right to me. That seems completely inequitable to me.
Business as usual. Yeah.
And
And
is maybe that's where Senator Sorokin was going with this question, but it would be interesting to learn more about that. That just doesn't seem equitable to me at all.
As some of the committee might know, I mean, business expenses like wages and stuff are typically in the tax world considered a deductible expense. The question about this is whether you should be able to deduct expenses paid for with non-taxable income. And throughout the tax code, there are very few places where, if any, where a business or anyone can deduct something that was paid for with non-taxable income. A great example that me and Abby Shepard talked about was the child and dependent care credit. If you open up a flexible spending account and fill it with non-taxable dollars, you cannot go ahead and use that money, pay for your child care, and then get the child tax credit on top, or the child dependent care credit on top of that. So it's sort of the same principle here. So when the IRS originally came out and said these expenses would not be a deductible expense, that was sort of in line with what the typical tax law is, but it has since been changed, and it's sort of that the Congress said that was their original intent, was to allow deductibility as well. So I guess that's what they wanted to do.
Okay, but we
Sure.
do not have to pass that on at the state level. We can decouple as we have. Senator McDonald.
This has been a very interesting meeting, and for those of us that have repeated often that we're all in this together, and then said that our goal is to all come out together, we are getting another indication that some of the guidelines and practices coming from the federal government are designed to make sure that we do not all come out of this together. And I urge, Senator Bray mentioned the recent history about unemployment insurance, where the last time there was a crisis, the rates were increased for employers and the benefits were reduced for employees. And in subsequent years, the rates have been reduced for employers, but the benefits haven't been increased for employees. And I urge, I'm sure that this committee will do its best to try and get all of these bits of information that we're getting piecemeal and see if we can't see the overall pattern and how we might best deal with it if we're in fact seeking to come out of this pandemic together. Thank you.
I think rates have been increased, Senator, because I was here when we had to do that and still have the scars. But at that point, the maximum was something like $310 a week, and we're up to $5. But we got in that predicament because we upped the benefits and didn't up the taxes. And then, so you got to keep it balanced.
I was asking, Madam Chair, we get all that information at the same time,
Like
rather than
balance.
different ones piecemeal, and we'll then determine whether we're coming out of this together or not. Yeah.
And I think that's what, I would think I was paraphrasing you when I said, if we had Tom Cavett in, we wanted to go beyond just the revenues, but who are the winners and losers? What, are we going, we're talking about
Yep.
the income gap here. Are we coming out better? Are we coming out worse?
Yeah, what's our
Who's
challenge?
coming
Yep.
out better, who's coming out worse? And then you get into, is there a way in our tax code, which is our great equalizer in this country, to perhaps equalize that a little bit? But it's, I haven't put a bill in because I don't have a solution, but I would love to come out with some kind of a committee or multi-committee bill, because these are obviously large issues that hit multiple committees. So Senator Bray.
I just wanted to double check. So Graham, can you remind me of what you were saying in terms of the timing around the federal interpretation of the treatment of this money? Like you were saying, people were, as best you knew or suspected, were treating it as it was not going to be a deduction. So they were, but then a clarification came along that said, no, in fact, you will get to deduct it as well as not treat it as income. When did that situation happen? Because, if someone tells you ahead of time how something will be treated, you usually build your business around that expectation. This seems like a bit of a windfall if this particularly favorable interpretation arrives late in the year.
So the payroll protection program was passed as part of the CARES Act, and that was in, I think, late March or early April. And all the money went out, and then there was a lot of discussion about whether the expenses paid for using PPP money were going to be deductible. The IRS came out, I think it was sometime in the summer, and said that no, you could not deduct those expenses with PPP money. And Congress and I think the Treasury sort of pushed back on that interpretation. But I can't say how accountants for businesses and how businesses planned. I was saying to the tax department, it makes sense that if you were a business, it'd be better to err on the side of caution, where you shouldn't assume that these expenses would therefore be deductible on the back end. Right. But it is possible that a lot were assuming that they'd be deductible and were paying taxes as such, and that's why they were sort of lobbying Congress to get the rule officially passed through Congress. But it is sort of my guess, and after seeing some conversations from revenue officials in other states, that the theory exists that businesses were more likely to be erring on the side of caution and not deducting, and therefore this passage in December means that they were probably overpaying taxes in the first half of the year, and then come April they'll receive refunds. So, right. So that's one timing issue, and the other timing issue is whether, if this is going to drive net income negative for lots of businesses, then you have potential carry forward issues in terms of revenue impacts for the state. And that's the other one. So you'll have an immediate hit in fiscal year 21, and then probably likely several years afterwards.
Right. And in what form did the federal government specify that it would be deductible? Was that part of HR 133 or where?
Exactly. Yeah, it was a provision in HR 133.
Okay. Thank you.
Don't do your best work at midnight.
Mhm.
No. Okay, Senator Sorokin, did I see your hand? Okay, obviously, we're going to be going into this in a lot more detail. And we don't even have the next saga or chapter, but I think we're pretty sure. I know the appropriations people are hoping that some money will be available to state and local governments, because I don't know about your local governments, but mine are looking at some pretty significant revenue decreases. At least I think the cities that depend on revenue from sources like parking garages, or fees, they were getting hit, not in property tax. We think this year, when the property tax bills come out, there's going to be more push for rebate because people's income will be lower last year. And so we're going to be having a hit there. And there will be, but apparently the property transfer tax is up and some grand lists are going up. So that's going to be another whole area to look at while we're trying to figure out what our revenues are going to be before we go home next year. But I think we'll start with Tom Cavett. I think Graham has given us some
Sobering.
interesting places to start looking with the whole, and yeah, we've got a lot of issues, and how do we deal with them? And how do we come out of this whole mess better off, with people being better off than they are now, especially given our workforce shortages in a lot of essential industries like healthcare and teaching, which can be fairly well, good paying jobs. So how do we get our folks in there? And we'll see. And we still haven't seen if there's going to be any lasting impact on our population or people moving in and staying, not just opening second homes to have as a escape. So a lot of questions. Okay, think about all of this. Let me know what you'd like to do next week, who you'd like to hear from. It takes a while for this to all start to gel. It usually does by the end. We got at least one bill today, which we can, I'll just put on to take a look at next week so we know what it is, and, then can decide if we want to take it up or when, how urgent it is.
Under comments, you got two bills actually today.
We did? I missed
You
one.
did.
What was the second one?
One is
was
about,
S1.
yes, S1 and S12. Military benefits.
Oh, I'm
retirement
blanking
benefits.
that one out.
Yeah.
That's an annual bill.
Yeah.
I just want to know about firefighters and police officers. Okay, Senator Brock.
Madam Chair, I would ask this year that you seriously take a look at that military retirement bill, not just because we're one of only 7 states that continues to tax it, but because it's an economic development bill. It's focused on increasing long-term revenue and permanent revenue for a relatively minor revenue loss. And I think it's something I'd like to at least have the committee have the opportunity to hear the pros and cons.
We heard them when we did the last rewrite. I think we heard them last time, but I'm always open. We'll hear them again. It looks like we will be looking at some changes to our tax code in relation to the federal tax code. And that's when we usually do this. And then again, we've got to get the revenue. It's easier to do a loss if you're not looking at a deficit. So that we'll know that the 19th, what our revenue forecast is, and then we will be able to go from there. But let me know, and we'll see what's going on. And tomorrow, I have lost my, for some reason, my little thing is bringing me into last year's finance committees. But tomorrow we're gonna be looking the Agency of Education update. So that's really going to be on what money they got, how they spent it, how they couldn't spend it, if they can keep. And there were several pots of money, as you remember last year, ones that were CRF that had to be spent, and then there were others that were had more flexibility and could be spent into this year, and just get a real sense as to where they are there. And then we're going to get, Chloe Wexler is going to come in and do a just our usual run through of the Ed Fund and what they're looking at right now. So that's it. Senator Bray.
Yeah, Madam Chair. So the old recipe of a penny on the education tax is roughly $10 million. Is that still about right, or is that number shifted while I've been out of the room?
I don't think it's shifted that much, but we'll get we'll have Chloe give us the most recent update.
Okay.
And we'll see where it goes.
So, I mean, does that mean basically something along the lines of a statutory requirement to spell out the 9 cents means that we're looking for roughly $90 million?
Well, I think one of the things we'll have Chloe do is give us an update, because the stipulations in the law that they have to do with that letter.
Yeah.
And one of them is they had to use the August revenue forecast. Sales have continued fairly strong, and I am assuming that the next, $600, sounds like had a fairly strong Christmas sales, retail. So that it also has to figure the 30 million in the reserves.
Okay.
So,
And on the sales tax piece, is it 2 cents of the 6 that comes in to?
no, all the sales tax comes in and a portion of the rooms and meals.
Okay.
But there is no general fund transfer now. It's all sales tax comes in. So run out and buy something. Lots, and just be really glad the Wayfair decision came down when it did, or
Yeah.
we
Okay.
would have been in really difficult position, because people are home and they had money, and a lot of them still had jobs, and online sales were really easy and were a nice diversion. So we did well in sales.
Thank you.
I need a new washing machine. I'm waiting for my check to come in. So I think that's it. I don't think we don't need to do any kind of a tutorial, I think, with the 2 new members on property tax, right? I think we've got that. Okay. All right. Thank you all. We'll see you tomorrow.
Ending live